welcome to Taking the Myth, your topical, skeptical discussion show. I'm Stephen Knight, and joining me to bring some extra brain power is the incredible, the amazing, the wonderful, the dying of AIDS, Iram Ramzan.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Right down your ears, everybody.
Yeah, sorry. I've come down with a cold. So if it's anything more serious, this may very well be my last podcast.
Yeah.
And this could be like one of those collector's items kind of things.
Yeah, all four of our listeners will treasure it.
It's not about quantity.
All right, so plenty of things to talk about, as always.
Really?
Few notice board items. The first being the Battle of Ideas. We were both there. I was on a panel. You came on the Sunday. I went home early on the Sunday because I just didn't want to see you. How was your experience?
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, so I was at the Battle of Ideas for the Sunday only. And the first talk I went to was about consent classes.
What's consent?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Stephen. Sounds like you could have benefited from this talk. I think, ever since the whole Me Too, Time's Up, and I Believe Her, it's just led to some questions and whether we need lessons about consent. How can we, do people really understand that no means no and yes doesn't always mean yes, things like that. And one of the speakers at the talk was actually Joanna Williams, who is associate editor at Spiked, and she made a lot of sense because she was talking about how that just because we've had these few incidents doesn't necessarily mean we need classes in consent, because people who attack women, people who harass women know that it's wrong.
Yeah.
So how a consent class is really going to educate them. And really she's saying, it's just turning women into perpetual victims, that we're raising women that they'll always be victims of something, that they're, oh, you can do this, but just remember, you'll always be a victim of harassment because you're a woman. And that, there's nothing you can do to control that. And I think that's such a dangerous sort of mindset to have in this day and age, especially because, we're supposed to have feminism and it's all about how women should have equal rights. And to me, it seems like, yeah, you have equal rights, but at the same time, you're always going to be second class and you're always going to be a victim of something. You're never going to be truly in control of yourself or your body.
You're not in fear of this rape culture with which you reside?
I'll tell you something, right? I've travelled to the Middle East and South Asia, and if you want to see a rape culture, it's in some of those countries, not here.
You won't find that in a Thomas
Britain.
Cook brochure. If you want to see a rape culture.
It's true, though. You go to these countries and men openly leer at you or they try and grope you. I have so many friends who've travelled to, say, Egypt or Morocco, and they're always telling me how men would constantly just behave so disgustingly towards them, whereas you don't really have that here in the West. Most people are civilized here. They don't go and grab women, and where women can, by and large, go out by themselves. They can do anything that men can do. So I don't like this phrase rape culture, and I don't believe we're living in a rape culture. There was one professor there, I think Susan Edwards, and I don't know, she seemed to be taking it a bit too far. She was just saying how there are instances where at work, a male colleague will comment on a female colleague's dress, and that's just appalling. And you think, really? I don't feel appalled if a male colleague said, "Oh, you look very nice today." I wouldn't take that to HR or anything. So, it was an interesting talk. It seemed to be more like a 3 against 1, really, where one person seemed to be very much quite sensible and saying these lessons are just, what's the point of them? Women really are in control of themselves, and let's not make women into constant victims.
Yeah.
So that was that was great thing to go to first thing in the morning.
It's one of them topics that's so incendiary by the very virtue of the fact it's about rape, and rape is horrendous. It's real. It happens. It's in my mind, it's one of the worst possible things you can do. So with that being the landscape of the conversation, leaves very little room for somebody to put their hand up and say, well, maybe you're misrepresenting some of the statistics. Maybe you're broadening the criteria for what constitutes sexual assault or harassment or, breach of consent, things like that. And the moment you start doing that, which you should do, it's a sensible thing to do, I tend to find that you get accused of being a rape apologist fairly quickly, as if someone concerned with these things is just annoyed that they don't get to go around raping. It's a very bad conversation to have, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. That's actually one of the points that somebody brought up in the conversation. They're saying now we seem to be broadening what exactly is sexual harassment, what is sexual assault, and since this whole Me Too thing, which started out as something that was a force for good, is all these trivial things are being added to the list now, and you just think, how far is this going to go? Because for me, I think there is a clear line on what is sexual assault, as opposed to, say, behavior that's maybe slightly odd or creepy or just devious, unwanted attention, or just like a bad sexual experience. I don't think they should all come under the same umbrella.
Well, I really enjoyed the Battle of Ideas. I was on a panel about religious freedom, and I'm going to try and play a clip from it later, which might tie into the ASLAN Awards. But we also guest appeared on another podcast the other day, Iona Italia's Tea for Two. She sometimes co-hosts with Helen Pluckrose, not this time, but she had us both on the other evening. I don't know when that's going to be released, but how do you think we did?
We were awesome.
It was amazing.
I think we should replace her. We should replace her as host, really.
I think it'll win an Emmy. Did the podcast get Emmys?
I don't know. I'm sure there are podcast related awards out there.
Well,
I don't know if...
I wouldn't know, Iram. I wouldn't know.
One day, Stephen,
I did win Best Podcast at QEDCon on the 25th of April 2015, presented by Skeptic Magazine. Not that it matters. Not that I have it on my desk right now, and I hug it every time we record.
You sleep with it, don't you?
Moving on swiftly. So, my panel, I have actually got some audio of it, and I do intend to release it at some point, but the audio's not quite there for a couple of the guests, and so I'm waiting on the venue to get back to me with a fuller recording, so keep your ears peeled for that. What else? Oh yeah, I'm in Birmingham on Saturday.
Doing in Birmingham?
It's the Secular Medical Forum. They're talking about medical issues that are adversely affected by belief. So that's going to be good, isn't it? Talking about, chopping out kids' genitals and the like.
Oh my God, you're going to
turn into Paul McCartney straightly, So, no, I am making light of a very serious and important conference, which you can still get tickets for, by the way, in Birmingham, an all-day conference. So it's a panel of professionals in the medical field. They're going to talk about the ways in which religion transgresses on people's rights and access to medical services. There will be talk of ritual circumcision as well, because that's just a sort of like a massive issue. General male circumcision as well, that doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. People tend to think it's benign. That came up on my panel at Battle of the Ideas. I'm doing a lot of talking about genitals lately, and I'd rather not, and it's not my fault. It's not my fault. If the religious had just put the scalpel down and be normal, we wouldn't even have to have this conversation, but they insist on modifying children's genitals. Every time I say that out loud, I think that I feel like that should be enough. They should go, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But they don't. They look at me like I'm an anti-Semite, or that I've got an unhealthy obsession with kids' parts. So it's one of them topics now, and I'm thinking I might just bow out, because I'm soon going to become the kid dick guy, and no one wants to be the kid dick guy.
Yeah. I don't know how to respond to that.
There was actually a guy at the end of the panel who came up to me who's a kind of like a campaigner for against male circumcision. So it's picking up steam. So moving on from genitals, Iram. Rod Liddle. Should we talk about Rod Liddle? He's the latest latest target of internet outrage. He's enjoying his 2 minutes hate at the moment. So I mean, before we talk about what he's in trouble for, I'm familiar with Rod Liddle's work because I subscribe to the Spectator. Now he's one of these columnists where I look forward to his column, and it's one of them ones where he'll say something that makes me laugh, then I instantly feel terrible for laughing, and then I think to myself, I can't possibly share this column, even though it's funny and got some good points in. He's a provocateur, he says things that aren't PC, and he does it, not in my view, out of bigotry, but he does it to poke fun at the far left, essentially, or people are so entrenched in their identity politics and think they can control language in the conversation. He'll basically say the thing you're told you're not allowed to say. And it's humour, whether or not it's to your taste or not, it's a different kind of thing. But what's your take on the man in general?
I think he's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I do have friends out there who disagree, and they think he's just an obnoxious and odious man. And that's mostly because of this incident he had with his girlfriend. I think there was some sort of domestic violence allegations there, and since then they just don't like anything that he writes. But my take on that would be, well, how many other columnists do we think have really perfect private lives as well? And also, as you said, he's deliberately provocative. He does it deliberately. He knows it will wind some people up. And that's the whole point of his columns, to write from that perspective. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a column. And it would just be a bland column like everyone else's.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this Sunday, the Sunday that's just gone, what he wrote about Anjem Choudhury, that seemed to have gone too far, though.
I kind of agree. So again, it was a perfect example of, as soon as I read it, I laughed and thought, oh, you can't say that. So the joke landed, but the material and the topic matter was so sensitive and egregious that you think it might be worthy of a joke down the pub rather than a column in the Sunday Times. And so I'm just going to explain what happened here. I mean, I'll go to the Independent. The headline is, this sounds so bad, Sunday Times' Rod Liddle suggests extremists should blow themselves up in London's Tower Hamlets, away from where the rest of us live. So yeah, Tower Hamlets is a very densely Muslim populated area. So I'll read what he said in his column. So he was talking about how he actually has something in common with Anjem Choudhury. Rod Liddle agrees with Anjem Choudhury that jihadis should blow themselves up. And he goes on to say, I don't really mind if they don't leave the country, so long as they blow themselves up somewhere a decent distance from where the rest of us live. Tower Hamlets, for example. So that's a joke. It's in poor taste. It's a dark joke. That is a joke about a suicide bomber detonating themselves in a Muslim area. And to be fair, if the shoe was on the other foot and some Islamist publication had made a joke about detonating themselves in Manchester or something, I think we'd pick up on it. I think we'd have something to say.
Yeah, but I mean, this is clearly different. I mean, imagine if it replaced Tower Hamlets, for example, with, I don't know, Essex. Would that still get the same response?
That's a good point, actually, because yeah. So therefore, he saw right. So yeah, that's the distinction. So by saying Essex, he's somehow denigrating the sort of annoying Essex Towie lifestyle, isn't he? You know, will somebody fucking bomb Essex? How many people have thought that after watching an episode of Towie? The only way is Essex. So yeah, that works as a joke, but it's still a joke about dismembering people, which is I think that's fine, to be honest, as long as it is a joke. But there's another issue here as well. He said he specifically named Tower Hamlets and then backs that up with, because that's away from where the rest of us live. So the Muslim interest groups and the outrage mongers, they're all saying, well, you're drawing a very divisive line between Muslims and us. You're drawing a very big line between Muslims and being British, us and their mentality. So I don't know if you think there's something to that criticism.
I think that's bollocks. I think it really it's making a comment on how Tower Hamlets is just like a deprived area, really. Although some people are making the remarks that it's become more gentrified recently, so
Starbucks in it.
Yeah, there's a Starbucks there. I think they also have a Costa somewhere as well. Do you know what? I read that. When I first read that, I thought, oh my god, that's probably going to get a lot of complaints.
Yeah.
But everything he writes gets complaints anyway. This is Rod Liddle. Funnily enough, I was actually listening to a podcast between him and Brendan O'Neill from Spiked.
Yeah.
And if you listen to him on that, you do not get the impression at all that he is a racist or a bigot.
No.
That he's a misogynist, that he just hates Muslims or anything like that. And he was talking about how, there should be a distinction between Muslims and Islam, and that no one should pick on Muslims, but everyone is entitled to criticize Islam if they want, which is a fair point to make. And he's very much from that old-fashioned left-wing background. He was also a member of the Labour Party. I think he was also part of the Socialist Workers' Party at one point as well. So he comes from that very left-wing background, and he's not far right or bigger as everyone seems to portray him as. My own thought when I saw that piece, when I read it, was that I don't know. I mean, if I'd been editing that piece, I may have removed that line just to be careful. But then again, how far does it go? Because if that's the whole point of Rod's piece, to be very provocative, then you might as well just censor half his articles then, because, most of the contents in that are very, very provocative, and not just to anyone living in Tower Hamlets, for example, but, to us, the trans rights activists, to just anyone, really. He doesn't really spare anyone.
Feminists, trans rights activists, Muslims, he does not care about hurt feelings. I get a bit worried, though, because I feel like, because of the waters I move in now and the topics I dip my toe in, I feel like I've got a very high threshold for taking offence. So it didn't really make my barometer twitch, that Rod Liddle article, but I instantly knew that it set other people off. I mean, I opened this podcast by making a joke about AIDS, and I just worry that I'm going to say something in public one day and be the new Rod Liddle just for making a joke. So
you can't really. It's just. I think this is what happens when we live in the age of social media now. It's like everything creates outrage so very, very quickly now, and maybe once upon a time someone would have written into the editor and said, "Oh, we didn't appreciate that line," and that's it. It would have been forgotten about. But now it's just it just becomes so much more bigger.
The mayor of Tower Hamlets has released a statement.
Yeah.
So
the MP for the area also wrote a letter to the editor in relation to the article.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know if this will have any effect. I don't know if Rod Liddle will say that he regrets his comments and apologise. He doesn't strike me as the kind of man to recant.
He has apologised before, I think, because he previously wrote something about, the man who murdered Lee Rigby.
Right.
So he made a comment once, and I think it was in terms of their appearance. I think because they were black, and that at the time I remember, because it was a good few years ago, that caused outrage. I'm just trying to remember what he said. Yeah, that's it. He referred to them as black savages.
Oh.
And that was later removed from his column that appeared in The Spectator, and then that obviously received a lot of complaints. And in response, he did say, I use, so I wouldn't have to use the phrase men of Muslim appearance. I use the word black to describe the appearance of the knifed men. If anyone took that the wrong way, I'm very sorry. So I don't think he was trying to be offensive.
He must know.
It just came out.
He must know.
I think sometimes when you write something, you do know if something is gonna get taken really, really badly. Yeah, you do. I think maybe that comment might have been that line in particular might have been misjudged, but at the same time, I just think if he had said a different place like Essex or Chelsea, for example, rather than Tower Hamlets, would it have caused the same level of outrage?
All right, well, we'll see what happens. Maybe the Sunday Times will say something, stick by him or get rid of him, I'm not sure. But what's apparent about internet outrage culture is they have very short attention spans, and they'll be hating someone else or something else by this time tomorrow. So my suggestion is, whenever there's internet outrage, just ride it out, and it'll die down, and they'll find someone else to hate. Another thing I wanted to talk about, something we never talk about, in fact, but I thought we'd introduce this particular topic for the October podcast, and that's Tommy Robinson and his current legal problems.
Sorry, who?
Stephen Yaxley Lennon. I think it's a French name. Monsieur Robinson is currently engaged with what feels like a never-ending legal process over contempt of court charges. I've been over that a million times. People can seek the podcast out, and it's an active case, so I probably have to be careful what I say. But the Sunday Times wrote a fairly interesting article about him the other day, which pulled together a few bits of information I already knew and had from various private sources sending me anyway. But it's that there's an accusation in there that the outrage is funding quite a lavish lifestyle for him, and he knows how to monetize outrage, and that's why he does a lot of what he does, because he knows if he can get a campaign going, the money comes rolling in. So a few examples of that was a former aide of his that worked with him. She said that she managed his Stripe account, which is a payment account where you receive payments, and there was 2 million in there at the time that he started campaigning against these contempt of court charges. What's your thought on this? I mean, he's just been campaigning recently about that Soldier X thing. He had a photograph taken with some young soldiers, and the soldiers were disciplined, so he started this massive movement now about how bad the military is, how underfunded the military is, and it just seems to be one thing after another whipping up people's sense of patriotism or emotions or injustice, and it seems feels to me very constructed. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as that decision was made, he was outside the court, and there seemed to be a stage erected for him as well. And this is coming from for a guy who seems to complain all the time that he's always being silenced. And here he is being given, a platform quite literally to speak on. And he was just using very incendiary language. He was saying to the journalist, "You are the enemy of the people." I mean, why would you say something like that? He's just using very, very divisive language. And he was also invited to the House of Lords by the UKIP peers, so so much for being anti-establishment.
Sorry, I mean, he's turned this whole thing into not that I may be guilty of contempt of court and jeopardise several grooming gang cases. He's turned it into, I'm a political prisoner, I'm being persecuted, I'm the victim here. And he actually revealed that he's fired his solicitors. His solicitors advised him basically to plead guilty, and he'll probably avoid jail time, and he's not doing it now. He wants to go to jail. He wants to be a martyr. Because in a way, if you just plead guilty and you're allowed on your way, it doesn't generate the headlines. It doesn't keep you relevant. It doesn't bring in the donations. So, this is what I don't get. He did nothing but moan about his time in prison, talk about how unjust it was, how he was treated terribly,
how he didn't get a TV.
How he doesn't get to see his kids, how it's making his wife sick. Now he's presented the opportunity not to go to jail by his solicitors, and he says, no, I'm going to jail. So it just seems I'm sick of hearing about him. I think I've had enough.
It's just ridiculous because, you know, all his fans are like, oh, he's the only one speaking up for the grooming gang victims. And you think, if you're so bothered about child abuse, you know, fucking donate to a charities that deal with them. Why don't you help out or something? Why don't you just give support to the victims? You know, you're so bothered about grooming gang victims that you know, you just stood outside a court chanting Tommy. There was an idiot also who was doing a Nazi salute apparently as well.
Oh, there's a few of them.
Yeah, nice. But you know, seriously, what are these people actually doing? What does Tommy Robinson actually do for the victims of grooming gangs?
There's this narrative in the air that he's exposed a grooming gang problem.
Well, no, he didn't expose them. He didn't expose them.
I know this. You know this.
The ones that exposed the grooming gang victims were the victims themselves, and then the lying, quote unquote, media, the enemy of the people, that actually reported it, even though they'd been there were attempts to silence them in the first place. But it was actually, you know, newspapers like the Times that reported what was happening.
People who did actual proper legwork and you know, really invested their time and blood, sweat and tears into getting these things to court. And he nearly completely torpedoed that process. But there is this narrative in the air that he's exposed grooming gangs, and it's the establishment, it's the state trying to shut him up because he knows too much. He's speaking the truth about Islam. He's made this all about Islam essentially as well. And I don't think it's that either. I think so. He's released a statement that he read out in court, and was, you know, the court's there's going to be another court date now. So apparently there's going to be an opportunity to cross-examine him during this court date, and I think once someone who actually understands contempt law and has had a good chance to look over the particulars starts asking him questions, I believe a lot of this will come unravelled. So my hope is that when it goes back to court, this will be the last time for a start. 2, that it'll be entirely fair and have no bearing whatsoever on the fact that it's Tommy Robinson and his history. You should be treated like anybody else, and the decisions made with direct reference to the particulars of the case and the facts, and then they come to a suitable and reasonable decision. But I'm just sick of all this hoo-ha and misinformation and riling up public outrage. I'm just going to read this one paragraph from the Times article. So, a former assistant to Robinson, who had access to his Stripe online payment processing account, claimed it contained £2 million, that's sterling, after his jailing and appeal, thanks to a flood of donations, mostly small amounts. So this is like, you know, working class people who support him, chipping in what they can here and there. Another former assistant, Lucy Brown, told the Sunday Times in August that Robinson operated a business in which your outrage, valid as it is, will be monetised as such. So these are the people who have first-hand experience inside his inner circle. And it feels like one massive credulity exploiting money-making machine.
It does, and you know, he's just, to me, it seems like a very, very selfish person. It's all about him. It's all about his image. He doesn't really care about anyone else but himself. I actually feel sorry for his family, because his wife and children are probably suffering so much right now, and when he's constantly going in and out of prison.
Here's what a fucking hero would have done. A hero would have said, listen, I've made a mistake, I've cocked up, it's quite serious, the consequences could have been of this mistake. Please don't take to the streets for me. Please don't cause any trouble. That's what he could have done. He could have said, the important thing here is the victims and the judicial process now. Please don't distract attention from that. But what he's doing is ratcheting up this narrative that he's a political prisoner. He's getting people to congregate, thousands of people, depending on what the numbers are, depends on where you read where the numbers are coming from, to come out and take to the streets and create this kind of almost civil unrest in a way. And he's just completely shifted focus from what the issue is to Tommy Robinson.
I have no sympathies for him, to be honest. Not anymore. He's no Nelson Mandela, let's face it.
No. All right, moving on. There was a little little tweet sent out by a little man in British government. Sajid, do you want to take that one? Do you want to explain what the hell happened there?
I don't know. What the hell happened there, Stephen?
That's a great question.
So recently, the Huddersfield grooming gangs were convicted. So there are about 20 men just recently convicted of sexual and vile crimes.
Funnily enough, the conclusion of the trial Tommy Robinson disrupted.
Yeah, so that was the trial.
Can I just add a very quick thing? Sorry to interrupt. So, if the defendants in that case could have proved that their right to a fair trial was jeopardised by the actions of Tommy Robinson, it would have gone to a retrial, which means bringing in the victims again, and they may not want to testify again, and hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of taxpayers' dollars. Now, it came to light in this report that the defendants' representatives had actually applied to have it retrialed due to contempt of court. They tried to make the argument that they actually went for it. They actually tried to make the argument that...
Oh, they did?
Yes. The only reason they didn't get away with it is because the judge says there's no reason to believe any of the jurors saw Tommy Robinson's broadcast. However, if they could have proven, or one of the jurors had said, well, I have seen it, that was it. That's all it would have took. That's how close it came to that being retrial. So people need to have a little think about that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, after the successful conviction of 20 men, Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, tweeted, "The sick Asian paedophiles are finally facing justice. I want to commend the bravery of the victims. For too long they were ignored. Not on my watch. There will be no no-go areas."
So, two issues there, isn't there? First one, racist. Second one, they're calling this no-go area a dog whistle, aren't they? So what I think he means is, this topic is not a no-go area. We will address this topic. We will no longer brush it under the carpet. That's what I took from it. But because he used the phrase no-go area, people are saying that's a dog whistle to racists who claim certain areas of the UK are Muslim ghettos by which white people are not allowed to enter.
Well, he's right. I mean, I wouldn't want you in my ghetto.
Well, okay. Well, I wouldn't want to get AIDS, so... See what I mean? You've literally got 10 minutes to live.
Oh, my God. Well, I don't understand how anyone could think Sajid Javid was trying to dog whistle to the far right. I don't think he dog whistles to anyone. I mean, to be honest, like, since he's been Home Secretary, he's come up with some really, really powerful statements. Yeah. And not shied away from very difficult topics. And, you know, the former leader of the On Abuse and Forced Marriage charity, Carmen Ivana, Jasvinder Sangera, actually wrote a leader in the Times saying she agreed with him and he was right to call out this behaviour. But obviously a lot of people were very, very unhappy with Sajid Javid's words and saying it was, you know, racist, or it was just it was unnecessary for him to use the word Asian in that. Why not just say paedophile? Because we don't why is race the focus of crimes here? But in this instance, you can't really discount it now, can you? I mean, I know somebody who was saying that one of the reasons why these men committed these atrocities is because they had a racist mindset towards white girls. And I thought, well, if that's the case, then surely saying Asian is right here. It should be pointed out that they're Asian then. And also, there were other people who were taking more issue with it by saying, well, they're not Asian, they're mostly Pakistani. Why not say Pakistani? But if you'd said Pakistani, then other people would have complained, why single out Pakistanis in this? I mean, maybe he could have phrased this better, but, you know, this is, I think my understanding of that tweet was that he was just trying to be very forthright and strong.
Enough is enough.
And say enough is enough. I'm not going to let these people get away with it any longer. And other people have said that race was a factor, but now everyone seems to be doubling down on it. And again, in the age of social media, everything has to cause outrage now, doesn't it?
Yeah. So what you want is a good, strong message on this. Man, I don't necessarily have faith that they are going to do what's necessary and sort out this problem, or if they're even able to sort this problem out. But when something like this happens, you want a leading politician to say, I recognise the problem and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. And that's exactly what he's done. And we're at the point, how many scandals later, how many thousands of girls later, and we're not even at a point where it can be spoken in public without mass outrage at trivial semantic issues like the word Asian or dog whistles. People are absolutely, it's anything other than acknowledge the problem. People don't want to talk about the problem.
No, they don't. And I just think, fine, if you don't agree with his language, okay, just say that and then move on. But no, people want to make a massive issue out of it. And you think, well, for me, the biggest injustice is the fact that so many girls were sexually abused.
Has Owen Jones said anything? Is he popped up? I couldn't bear myself to have a look.
No, neither could I.
No.
He's just become unbearable since the last election, to be honest, and I don't want to go through his timeline again. It would actually make me physically sick.
What, like more sick than you are now? Like more than age sick?
Like proper sick.
Jesus. Okay, so I'm just utterly depressed because every time I tweet out a story about one of these grooming gangs, they're like, "What about the white rapists?" And it's like, yeah, okay.
Oh, do you know what? Oh my God, I'm so sick of people saying, oh, the majority of rapists are white.
Gee,
well,
you
yeah,
think?
When you have a majority white country, then yeah, the majority are going to be bloody white, for crying out loud. But in this type of crime, which is on-street grooming, the vast majority are disproportionately Asian, and that really has to be commented on. You can't just ignore it. And it's like somebody was pointing out to me the other day. They said, can you just imagine what kind of outrage there would be if it had been a majority white gang grooming, mostly Asian girls? There'd just be riots on the streets.
One gang. It would have took one gang to create absolute, utter outroar, hysteria, outrage. People, honestly, if it was just one white gang that preyed exclusively on non-white girls, wow, that would have been something that would have completely turned the country on its head. Yet we have several gangs of Asian men doing this, thousands of girls, and we still can't talk about it because I have to spend all my time arguing back against whataboutery and accusations of bigotry and racism. So I think I've just reached the point where I don't care what labels people attach now. I'm still going to talk about what I think is important. I think it's time for the ASLAN Awards.
There's this misconception that people derive their values from their scriptures.
Who goes to hell?
Gays, fags, hundreds and hundreds of Jews.
You identify yourself as gay. Why do you then choose to be a Muslim when it says explicitly in Judeo-Christian tradition that is prohibited?
There's this misconception that people derive their values from their scripture.
The ASLANs.
Now, the ASLAN Awards is an award for an apologist spouting lies and nonsense, and I have a kind of personal nomination. Let's be honest, they're all personal, aren't they, really? It's just generally people
just someone
I dislike.
You can't stand, and you're like, right, that's it.
So,
again, this award.
Ed Husain, he co-founded Quilliam with Majid Nawaz. They're not in partnership on that project anymore, but he wrote a good book about Islamism, so he does a lot of work as a Muslim tackling this Islamist ideology. Now, people who do that get my respect because they're naming the problem and they're talking about the problem honestly, and they're doing it from the community that they're in, which is the Muslim community, and that makes things 10 times harder. So you can't take that away from him. He has my respect for that. But as I continue to move forward and then throw him under the bus, a while back, he may have even won the ASLANs before actually, but he chose Darwin Day about 2 years ago to out himself as an evolution denier. He basically called it he kind of likened it to militant atheism and said that it's an ugly theory, and he said, you keep your theories, I've got my facts. So he's a very conservative, narrow-minded Muslim by the sound of it. But that's not why he's an ASLAN Award winner this week. I was on his panel, and I don't think he knew. It never came up that I'd wrote some blogs about him before. I wrote 2 blogs about him denying evolution. I'd kind of forgot, really, but it wasn't mentioned. We were perfectly friendly, and he was polite and lovely, and I spoke to him before and shook hands and everything. But we had little pokes and digs at each other throughout the panel. I disagreed with a lot of what he was saying. He basically kept trying to compare my viewpoint, atheism, secularism, to nihilism, and he actually said on the panel at one point that it'd lead to the end of civilization, or the downfall of civilization. I've got a little clip. Do you want to hear it?
Oh my god, yeah.
Buckle up, Iram. It's 4 minutes.
Yes.
Stephen?
We're all doomed. No. I think we are making progress. I think Ed mentioned at the beginning of the discussion that the problem is the sort of man-made interpretation of Scripture. And my issue is that the Scriptures themselves are man-made, and they contain all the things you'd expect from man of that period. And that's why we're struggling to reconcile them with the 21st century social attitudes. And I think the lady at the front does have a point, in the sense that no one's afraid in this room to mock Christianity. No one's afraid to take the mick out of the Pope or Jesus or tell a joke. But the atmosphere would change very quickly in this room if I started to make a Mohammed doodle, which, don't worry, I won't. And I think that's the problem. We've made progress in one sphere, but we're not applying the same principles to another. So it's sort of like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back in that sense.
Okay. Ed, optimistic for the future. How could we approach these issues in a more intelligent way?
By resorting to the power of human reason. And that's not in any way in contradiction with the power of revelation or the power of faith. I mean, if you go to Westminster Abbey and you look at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and there are always flowers around it, and it's right in the middle, so it's hard to miss. You see writing on it about the soldiers in the First World War that had died for God, for country, and for king. They died for something. There was something worthy of defending. They had a moral clarity. It's almost impossible to imagine that if there was a Third World War in which we had to defend Western civilization, secular liberalism, gender equality, racial equality, individualism, openness, the rule of law, it's hard to imagine that in the year 2021 that we would erect such a tomb and say that people had died to defend God, country and Queen. And that's the outcome, and that's the worry in my mind, that progress can easily be wound back. It's happened many a times in our history previously, and the thesis that Stephen here puts forward, the logical conclusion of that is the complete loss of moral clarity, belief, and having anything worthy of defending, because it's all moral relative and life has no meaning and nothing is worth defending.
That's not a logic I recognise.
Well, that's the logic that puts us in a position where we can't recognise the soldier and the unknown tomb.
Are you making the claim that the only way we can arise at meaning is through religious beliefs? No, we can't just arrive at meaning for its own sake?
No, we do that through a reconciliation between religion and reason, between revelation.
Why do we have to have religion?
Sounds as though we have to have a return match, doesn't it, really? Because we've run out of time, unfortunately.
So, I outright interrupted his closing statements, because it was like the 4th time he'd accused me of sort of having my worldview, because it's not religious in character, lacks what he said there. He said moral clarity. A few times before that, he said it'd lead to the downfall of civilization, which, it's quite a big ask for somebody who just doesn't want to be part of the God Club. So he's very. I also mentioned at one point in the conversation, I referred to ritual circumcision as mutilation, and he was shocked. It's as if he'd never heard that term used in the context of circumcision before. He couldn't understand what the problem was. So I hope to have that online at some point, but he just seems like a very close-minded. He's making the argument that the only way you can have meaning is religious belief. And that makes no sense to me whatsoever, as if like family, loved ones, food, sex, art, music, travel, all these things you can't derive meaning from or purpose if you're godless. And it just seems like a very unsophisticated worldview.
I can understand where he's coming from, because of...
Fuck you, Iram.
You're wrong, Stephen. Just face it. No, because, I come from that background where, obviously you're raised to believe that there's a higher being, that there is a God, that this world is nothing. It's the afterlife that matters. And that type of belief, even if you stop believing in religion or something, you still, sometimes there are people who feel that there needs to be value in life and there needs to be something more to what we can see, what we're experiencing now. I think you're right that we're on this planet for a short time. We should make the most of what we have and enjoy everything. And, there's so much pleasure we can get from so many different sources in this world. But if you're religious like Ed is, then he's not going to see it from your point of view. He will think that there has to be something more because that means more. Does that make sense? Like
the issue I have is this idea of moral clarity. So he thinks that he's got a moral foundation that I don't, and I think,
well, of course he does, because he thinks he has God on his side.
I think he's got it completely backwards. I think what he has is moral dogma. He has to sing to the tune of his scripture, whereas I'm a free thinker. I'm free from that. I'm free to consider morality and ethics and how they apply to the concept of well-being from a more philosophical perspective.
Yeah, but from his point of view, because you don't have scripture to base your values on, that means you can believe in absolutely everything. You can change your mind. You might end up, eating babies as well one day because you think that's morally right, because you don't have God or scripture telling you what not to do.
I mean, I do like a good baby, but that's by the by. But I mean, I have to invoke Christopher Hitchens on this one. He said, in a world without religion, good people will do good things and bad people will do bad things. But if you want to get a good person to do a bad thing, that takes religion. And we can all think of exclusively religious bad deeds, can't we? I'm not going to martyr myself at any point via £200 of explosives in whatever cause. However, there's not a single good deed that a believer could carry out that an unbeliever couldn't carry out either. So I just think he has. I'm very surprised that somebody who's so active in combating Islamism has a very myopic view of moral values, objective or otherwise.
It doesn't surprise me though. That doesn't surprise me. I've come across so many people who think like that, who think that terrorism or extremism is a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of the faith of Islam, and what they really need to do to stop being extremists is to become a quote-unquote proper Muslim and go back to the text and read it properly, like they're reading it. Whereas the extremists will see it in a very sort of black and white view, like, oh, it says it in this chapter here, why can't I do it like that? So that doesn't surprise me.
All right. So we can either choose another topic if you want to run with something, or we can have a look at the questions.
I say let's look at the questions.
Let's look at the questions, okay. Okay, so what I like to do in a very unconstructive and short time period before recording is tweet out a call for questions. So if you're a listener, and there's thousands and thousands of you, send us some questions at gspellchecker on Twitter or at Iram_Ramzan on Twitter, and we'll try and include them in a future recording. All right, Michael A. Lowry has asked, speaking the whole unvarnished truth can be sometimes counterproductive when trying to persuade people on a contentious topic like religion. How do you balance the competing goals of unwavering honesty and political expediency? It's a very, very good question.
That's a good question.
Well articulated.
Like
yeah, I've actually thought a lot about this over the years. I don't know if you want to have a go or let me rant.
This is a very tricky one, and I think it really depends on your audience, because speaking from personal experience, like I remember many years ago when I came across say atheists or ex-Muslims, for example. I just couldn't get their point of view, and I didn't get it. And I thought, why is this guy saying things about Islam to me that are just really offensive and provocative? And it didn't do anything to change my mind on anything, to be honest. So that didn't work for me, really. And it was the same with Christopher Hitchens as well. The fact that he was so
Peace be upon
blunt
him.
and honest. Yeah. If anything, just made me more stubborn in my beliefs. Whereas I've come across other people who have said, oh, I read Richard Dawkins' book, or I heard a talk by Richard Dawkins, and it just completely opened up my mind. And I think it's just a difficult one to decide, because everyone's so different, and they'll respond to things in different ways. I mean, if I'm having a conversation one-on-one, that's different to, say, if I'm out with a group of people who I can sense will be maybe very hostile or just don't really want to hear what I have to say. Because sometimes if you're blunt and honest, and I have a sort of tendency to be a bit blunt sometimes, people don't respond to it very well. Whereas if you try and be diplomatic and say, well, this is what I believe, and you don't have to, but I'm just putting it out there, and maybe you can read upon it yourself later, they might think, okay, I'll do that, and they might find that they agree with what you've said. And it's because it's all very personal, isn't it? Your religious beliefs and your political beliefs can be very personal, and nobody likes having their religious views contradicted, because they take it as an attack on them rather than their beliefs. So, and we're not very like rational or logical creatures, really. We are quite emotional. So I would say it just depends on who you're talking to be honest.
It has to, I mean, you've nailed on the head there with audience, and it also has to be about what you intend to achieve. So in terms of audience, if your goal, half the time, a lot of these debates, when you mention Hitchens, he's not trying to appeal to the believer, he's trying to appeal to the nons as such, the fence sitters, the people who haven't really considered this before, but I haven't like hitched their wagon to any particular side, and they can be won over by his emphatic display. Now there's a lot of data to suggest that people entrenched in certain ideologies or beliefs don't actually respond to facts, which is quite counterintuitive, really. Atheists and secularists and so-called skeptics can be a bit myopic. They think they can tell someone who believes the world's 6,000 years old, well, look at this, we have here, look at the fossil, they think they can just present facts and the person will change their mind. And in a perfect world, that's how it should happen. But it doesn't, as data and research tells us time and time again. So it can be fun to knock down religious zealots, and sometimes it's entirely necessary to knock people down a peg or two in public. So when you've got an audience, the Hitch method works really well. It's quite exhilarating. It's what got me into doing all this, I have to say. However, if you're looking to move someone to a more reasonable place or change their mind or something, it's not best to go in all guns blazing, making them feel like they're under attack, telling them they're stupid or they're idiotic for not sharing your views. I find the Socratic method works really well with them kind of people. Rappaport's rules is quite a good way of approaching this as well. You've got to be complimentary of something someone says, and then you've got to relate back to them in a way they'd agree you've summarized correctly. Also, with the Socratic method, it's all about asking questions rather than statements, getting them to think about what they believe a bit more, and it might not move them there and then, but it sometimes stays with them, and a couple of months down the line they may have shifted to a more reasonable place, and they'll think they've got there on their own.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I had a friend who did that with me once when I was sort of struggling with something, and I said to him,
was it AIDS?
I'm actually gonna slap you when I see you next. It was something very personal. I won't get into it, but it
was AIDS.
I was it was not AIDS. It was gonorrhea. Okay. Oh God, I've just said that probably on fucking podcast.
I'm putting that on loop.
And I said, "Oh, do you think that really is what happened or what this person said? He said, well, I know I believe, but, you know, what do you think reading that? And I think that was what got me really, really questioning what I really thought and believed. It wasn't because the other method where someone said, well, this is the truth, blah blah, face up to it, that didn't really work with me, and I don't think that works for a lot of people. It just makes them more stubborn in their beliefs, whereas if you make them question it themselves, I think that's a lot more productive. I mean, there are some people who, you know, if you said to them, well, actually, no, this is the truth, they might think, oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think the vast majority are not like that. They will, I think if you make them question their beliefs in a certain way, that will maybe work a lot better than simply just, I don't know, insulting them or being very harsh and blunt.
Yeah, I would also recommend Wheaton's Law, which can be summarised as don't be a dick. And that helps conversations of this kind. But you make a great point about religion and belief being very closely wed to ideas of self-worth and virtue and their own personal, character and identity. So when you go for the Jesus myth or things to do with Muhammad, that can be taken very personally. So it's about what you want, really. Do you want to destroy that person, make them look silly, but not have moved them along the reasonable scale at all, or do you want to are you going to think politically and be a bit more diplomatic? And it's hard, and it's something I've got better at over the years, but obviously I have off days. Twitter, I'm not very diplomatic on, because Twitter's about the audience. I'm more about the casual observer looking in on what I'm doing, rather than trying to convince someone who thinks all atheists are faggots to change their ways. You know what I mean? I want to humiliate that person to the entertainment of other people, essentially. So that's how I feel about it. Well, Iram, I think we may have actually nailed it. All right. Well. It's been a pleasure, and I hope somebody invents a cure for AIDS before it's too late for you.
For fuck's sake. I swear to God, if someone just replies to me with fucking #AIDS and all that crap, I'm just gonna go mental.
Yeah, so if you've got this far into the podcast this week, the hashtag is AIDS and all that crap. So yeah, you this is the test. Iram doesn't like tests. Obviously, she's got AIDS. I think I'll. I think I'll leave you to it. I'm starting to get a little bit worried that AIDS can be transmitted digitally. So
if it is, I fucking hope it is. I hope you get it.
AIDS for everyone. All right, Iram. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Don't die. Please don't die. Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation, produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener-supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?